The sound came first. A sharp crack of leather against skin, loud enough to cut through the polished murmur of the luxury mall. Amara Kingsley stumbled, the shopping bag slipping from her hand as she collided with a glass display. For a heartbeat, time stalled. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. She didn't need to look up to know who stood over her. Marcus Wellington had always announced himself with cruelty. "Look at you," he said. His voice carrying easily, practiced, confident. "Still pretending you belong in places you can't afford." Amara steadied herself against the display, her fingers trembling. Blood welled where glass had bitten into her palm. Around them, marble floors gleamed, chandeliers reflected perfectly styled faces, and no one intervened. Public humiliation had become entertainment. Marcus smiled, satisfied. To him this was simple. She was still the broke ex. The woman he'd left behind when she stopped being useful. The one who once begged him not to walk away. What he didn't see was the thin platinum ring she instinctively turned inward against her finger. He didn't know the car waiting underground. He didn't know the name that now followed hers everywhere she went. Most importantly, Marcus had no idea whose call was lighting up her phone at that very moment. Amara ignored it for now. Because right now, in this frozen space, Marcus still believed he had power. He still thought she was nothing. And in a matter of minutes, that illusion would collapse so completely it would redefine the rest of his life. But first, there had been a morning. Earlier that day, Amara had stood in a quiet, sunlit room surrounded by wealth she still hadn't fully grown used to. She chose simplicity anyway. Clean dress, minimal jewelry, control over excess. "You always dress like you're bracing for loss," Viktor Morelli had observed calmly from the doorway. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. She smiled at him. Old habits. His gaze lingered, not on her clothes but on her expression. "Take security today." "I'm just going shopping." "That's when people are careless," he replied. Not protective, not loud, just final. She had agreed, kissed him once, and left, never imagining the past would find her in a cathedral of glass and gold. Back in the mall, Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound intimate. "Dangerous, personal. Still alone?" he asked softly. "Or did you finally find someone to save you?" Amara lifted her eyes to meet his. And somewhere beneath the building, engines began to turn. Amara straightened slowly, refusing to rush, refusing to give Marcus the satisfaction of seeing her scramble. The sting in her palm throbbed, but she held herself the way she always did now. Shoulders relaxed, spine aligned, breath measured. People were watching. She felt it. Phones angled just slightly too high. Curiosity disguised as concern. Marcus mistook her stillness for weakness. He glanced at her clothes and smirked, the assessment quick and dismissive. No logos. No obvious excess. To him, it confirmed everything he already believed. "You always did like pretending," he said lightly, as if they were sharing a joke. "Walking into places like this, hoping no one notices you don't belong." Amara met his eyes. There was no fear there. No apology either. What Marcus saw, and misunderstood, was restraint. He had always confused quiet with emptiness. In the past, when she had nothing, she had begged. Now, with everything, she had learned the power of silence. "I'm just shopping," she said calmly. Marcus laughed. "With what money?" The question was bait, thrown confidently. He expected her to flinch, to defend herself, to explain. That was how it used to go. He spoke, she reacted. He defined, she shrank. But Amara only looked past him, her gaze drifting briefly to the polished storefront windows, the reflections of people who no longer mattered. She thought of the morning light in her penthouse, of the man who drank his espresso without sugar and read the news like it was a chessboard, of the life she'd built piece by piece, without witnesses. Marcus followed her gaze and scoffed. Still daydreaming. Some habits never die. What he didn't see was the subtle shift around her. The way two men had adjusted their positions without touching her. The way the air itself seemed to tighten, as if the space had registered a miscalculation. Amara had once been broke. She had once counted coins, swallowed pride, slept with hunger gnawing at her ribs. Marcus had seen that version of her and decided it was permanent. That was his mistake. Because power had never announced itself in her life with noise. It arrived quietly, through patience, through survival, through love that did not need to prove anything. She looked back at him then, really looked, and for the first time Marcus felt something unfamiliar flicker beneath his confidence. Uncertainty. He dismissed it instantly. After all, she was still just Amara. And he was still certain she was nothing. The world, however, had already begun to disagree. The mall dissolved around her, replaced by memories she rarely allowed to surface. There had been a time when Marcus's voice had sounded like safety, warm, certain. He had known exactly what to say when she doubted herself, how to frame his ambitions as their future. Just a little longer, he used to say, smiling as she paid another bill. I'm so close. She believed him because she loved him, and because love made patience feel noble instead of foolish. She worked more hours than she admitted to anyone. Early mornings, late nights, weekends swallowed whole. Marcus called it temporary sacrifice. She called it partnership. When she came home exhausted, he kissed her forehead and thanked her for believing in him. She mistook gratitude for loyalty. The first warning signs had been small. His irritation when she asked about money. The way he joked about her being too emotional whenever she questioned a decision. How disagreements always ended with her apologizing, for pushing, for doubting, for not being supportive enough. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He had learned that control worked better when it sounded reasonable. Then she found out she was pregnant. For a moment she thought it would change everything. She imagined Marcus smiling in disbelief, pulling her into his arms, talking about names and plans. Instead, his expression had closed off, like a door quietly locking. He didn't yell. He didn't leave immediately. He simply became distant, colder, as if withdrawing piece by piece while she was still standing right there. The morning he disappeared, the apartment felt wrong before she even saw the empty closet. His side of the bed untouched. His phone disconnected. Their joint account drained to nothing. On the kitchen counter, a note written carefully, almost politely, explaining that he couldn't be tied down, that he needed freedom, that she would figure it out. She tried. But jobs don't wait for explanations, and landlords don't accept promises. Each loss came faster than the last. By the time reality caught up, she was alone with fear and a future she could no longer afford. The pregnancy ended quietly in a sterile room with white walls and no one to hold her hand. She didn't tell anyone. Grief felt like another bill she couldn't pay. That version of Amara had survived by shrinking, by blaming herself, by believing that love had simply chosen someone else. Standing in the mall now, she felt the echo of that woman. Tired, hopeful, disposable. But she also felt the distance. Marcus had been right about one thing back then. She had figured it out. Just not in the way he ever imagined. Viktor Morelli never announced himself. That was the first thing Amara had learned about him. They met in a room where men spoke too loudly, where power was usually displayed through bravado and threats. Viktor had been seated apart, hands folded, listening. While others postured, he observed. When he finally spoke, the room changed. Not because he raised his voice, but because everyone else lowered theirs. He asked questions that didn't sound like questions. Statements framed as curiosities. He remembered details people forgot they'd revealed. And when he disagreed, he didn't argue. He decided. At first, Amara hadn't known who he was. That anonymity had been intentional. Viktor preferred to be underestimated. Made outcomes cleaner. He noticed her because she didn't try to impress him, didn't shrink either. She spoke carefully, honestly, without performance. It was a quality he valued more than loyalty. Their conversations began quietly. Coffee. long walks where he listened more than he spoke. Viktor never pried into her past, never asked her to explain her scars. He had them too. Different shapes, same depth. When he did speak of his world, he didn't glorify it. He named it plainly. Power, consequence, responsibility. If I step into your life, he told her once, nothing will ever be casual again. She believed him. Viktor's influence moved through cities like weather, unseen until it altered everything. Businesses changed hands without announcements. Conflicts ended before they escalated. Men who had been untouchable learned limits without understanding who set them. He didn't chase dominance. Came to him because he was consistent. With Amara he was different. Still controlled. Still precise. But gentle in ways that mattered. He noticed when she stopped speaking. When old habits surfaced. When she prepared for loss even in moments of safety. You don't have to disappear to survive anymore, he told her quietly one night. Marriage to Viktor hadn't been loud. No spectacle. No headlines. Just a contract witnessed by people who understood what it meant. She became his wife, not as a possession, but as a constant. The one thing in his life he did not leverage. Now, standing in the mall with Marcus's voice scraping at old wounds, Amara felt Viktor's presence without seeing him. In the way the air seemed too still. In the subtle movements nearby. In the certainty settling into her bones. Marcus thought power was volume. Display. Humiliation. Viktor ruled without noise. And when he arrived, the world always adjusted. The mall gleamed like a promise no one intended to keep. Glass walls rose toward the ceiling, reflecting chandeliers and polished marble, multiplying wealth until it felt endless. Amara moved through it quietly, her footsteps measured, her posture relaxed. She had learned how to exist in places like this without reaching for them. Luxury no longer made her feel small. Simply was. She should have left the moment she sensed it. That tightening in her chest, the faint pull of instinct she'd learned to trust. Fate rarely announced itself. It waited until you were distracted. Marcus was leaning against a storefront as if he owned the space, laughter spilling easily from him as he spoke to someone just out of Amara's view. He looked unchanged. Same confidence built on borrowed certainty. Same ease with attention. For a split second, she wondered if he would pass without seeing her. Then his gaze lifted. Recognition didn't soften him. It sharpened him. The smile that spread across his face wasn't surprise. It was opportunity. As if the universe had handed him proof that some people never really escape. He said something to the woman beside him, eyes never leaving Amara, and began to walk her way. Every rational thought told Amara to turn around, to disappear into the crowd, to choose peace over confrontation. But her body didn't move. The past had weight, and for one suspended moment, it pressed against her from all sides. Amara, Marcus said, drawing out her name. Familiar. Possessive. Didn't expect to see you here. She met his eyes steady. I'm busy. He laughed, loud enough to turn heads. Doing what? Window shopping. People slowed. Curiosity sharpened. The mall, designed for spectacle, welcomed another one. Marcus glanced at her hands, her clothes, her stillness, and decided, incorrectly, that nothing had changed. That time had been kinder to him than it had to her. He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to feel intimate. You always liked places like this, he said. Even when you couldn't afford them. Amara felt the old instinct rise, the urge to explain, to justify. She let it pass. This conversation isn't happening, she said. Marcus's smile thinned. He hated dismissal. Hated not being the one in control. He gestured around them, at the gleaming glass and watchful faces. Relax. I'm just surprised you're brave enough to show up here. Brave. The word echoed strangely, because bravery wasn't what had brought her here. Habit had. Routine. A life reclaimed. Marcus mistook her silence for surrender. What neither of them acknowledged was how the air had shifted. How nearby movements had slowed. How this meeting, random, impossible, had crossed an invisible line. Some places are too fragile for the past to walk into. And some mistakes only reveal themselves when it's already too late. Marcus had always liked an audience. He shifted slightly, angling his body so his voice carried, so the people pretending not to listen didn't have to strain. What began as a private cruelty became a performance with practiced ease. He laughed again, shaking his head as if she were a shared joke. "I mean really," he said, gesturing at her like a punchline. "Of all places." Few people slowed. Someone stopped entirely. Phones appeared, not obvious, just enough. Amara felt the attention settle on her skin. Heat without warmth. The old instinct flared again, sharper this time. Keep it calm, don't provoke, don't escalate. Marcus thrived on reaction. He always had. "Do you work here now?" he continued, eyes scanning her as if searching for a badge. "Or are you just killing time between disappointments?" The woman beside him laughed too quickly, looping her arm through his with performative possession. "This is her?" she asked, loud enough to be heard. "The one you told me about?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah." The phase. Something brittle cracked in Amara's chest. Not from pain but from recognition. This was familiar. The way he reduced people. The way he edited history until it fit his ego. "You don't need to do this," Amara said quietly. "Oh, relax," Marcus replied. "You always take things so seriously. I'm just being honest." He leaned in closer, voice dropping, but the damage was already public. "You should be grateful, actually. Not everyone gets a reminder of how far they haven't come." A ripple moved through the crowd. Discomfort mingled with fascination. No one intervened. Cruelty, when wrapped in confidence, often passed as entertainment. Marcus mistook the silence for approval. He stepped back, raising his hands theatrically. "Look, I'm not judging. Not everyone gets a fairy tale ending. Some people peak early." His eyes flicked over her again, slow and deliberate. "And some people just don't." Amara felt the urge to leave surge hard and fast. To walk away and never look back. But leaving now would mean letting him narrate her story one last time. She lifted her chin. "That's enough," she said. The words were soft. They landed anyway. Marcus's smile faltered for half a second, so brief most wouldn't notice. He recovered quickly, scoffing. "There it is. Still playing the victim." He reached out then, not quite touching her, but close enough to invade the space she had fought so hard to claim. "You should have stayed gone," he said. Around them, the mall hummed on, glass and light and curated beauty, while something darker settled into place. Marcus thought he was winning. The crowd thought they were watching drama. No one yet understood they were witnessing the final mistake of a man who believed humiliation was harmless. And Amara, steady and silent, knew the performance was almost over. Amara's phone vibrated once in her hand. She hadn't realized she'd picked it up. The screen lit softly, the name enough to slow her breathing. Viktor. No missed calls. No frantic messages. Just a single alert precise as everything about him. Question not yet asked. She didn't answer. Not yet. Marcus noticed the movement and smiled, misunderstanding it completely. "Calling for backup?" he asked lightly. "Relax. I'm not going to hurt you." His eyes said otherwise, but he enjoyed the performance too much to care about truth. Amara slid the phone back into her bag. That was when the air changed. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No rush of bodies. Just a subtle tightening, like the moment before a storm breaks when the sky hasn't caught up to the weather yet. Nearby, two men who hadn't been there seconds ago adjusted their positions. Another stepped closer to the railing above. Movements quiet, purposeful. Marcus kept talking. "You know," he said, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret, "I almost felt bad for you once." "Almost," he chuckled. "But then I remembered how exhausting you were." Amara barely heard him. Her attention had turned inward, to the rhythm she'd learned to trust. Viktor didn't react emotionally. He calculated. Somewhere, far below the glass and marble, instructions were being given without urgency. Names were being checked. Cameras were being accessed. Doors were being quietly reconsidered. Power didn't rush. It arranged. Marcus took another step closer, crowding her space again. "You still don't get it, do you?" he said. "This is how the world works." Amara looked at him, then really looked. Not with fear. Not with anger. With distance. "You're right," she said softly. He grinned, mistaking agreement for surrender. Behind him, a woman glanced over her shoulder, frowning. A security guard paused mid-step, his hand hovering near his radio. Conversations nearby thinned, voices lowering without knowing why. Marcus felt it then, a faint prickle of unease. He straightened, scanning the space around them, irritation flickering across his face. "What are you smiling about?" he asked. Amara hadn't realized she was. She thought of Viktor's voice. Certain. The way he never asked questions unless the answer mattered. Her phone vibrated again. This time she answered. "Yes," she said quietly. There was no reply. None was needed. Somewhere between one breath and the next, Marcus Wellington stopped being the loudest thing in the room. And that was when the mall truly fell silent. The silence gave her room to breathe, and with it came everything she'd kept locked away. "I didn't tell you everything," Amara said softly. Viktor didn't interrupt. He never did when something mattered. His presence, even through the phone, was steady. An anchor, not a shield. "I told you I'd been hurt," she continued. "I didn't tell you how carefully it was done." Her gaze drifted past the glass walls, past the polished reflections. The mall faded again, replaced by small apartments and unpaid bills, by promises that sounded like love until they became leverage. "Marcus never hit me," she said. "He didn't have to. He made me believe everything was my fault. That if I just tried harder, loved better, stayed quieter, things would work." She swallowed. "I paid for his dreams, his risk, his failures. And when I got pregnant, I thought it meant we were finally building something real." Her voice didn't break, but it softened. "He waited until I'd rearranged my life around that hope. Then he took everything and left." Viktor's breath was slow on the other end of the line. Controlled. "I lost the baby alone," she said. "And after that I stopped telling the story. Not because it didn't matter, but because it hurt to say it out loud. Because surviving felt easier than remembering." She paused, letting the truth sit between them. Letting it be real. "I didn't want you to see me as broken," she admitted. "Or fragile. I didn't want my past to become something you had to protect me from." Viktor spoke then, quietly. "I don't protect you from your past." "I know," she said. "But I was afraid that once you knew everything, you'd see me differently." Another pause. Longer this time. "I do," he said. "I see you more clearly." Amara closed her eyes. For the first time, the memories didn't crush her. They simply existed, acknowledged, no longer hidden. "I'm not that woman anymore," she said. "But she's still part of me." "Yes," Viktor replied. "And she survived." When Amara opened her eyes, the weight she'd carried for years had shifted. Not gone, but lighter. Shared. Marcus's voice drifted faintly from somewhere behind her, sharp and impatient. For the first time it didn't reach her. The truth had been buried long enough. And now that it was spoken, it no longer belonged to him. Viktor arrived without announcement. There was no surge of noise, no dramatic entrance. He simply appeared at the edge of the gathering, his presence registering before his face did. Conversations thinned. People stepped aside without knowing why. Even the lights seemed harsher where he stood, as if the space itself had recalibrated. Marcus noticed the shift too late. He turned, irritation already forming, ready to assert himself, then stopped. The smile he wore faltered, recalculated, tried again. "Is there a problem?" he asked, voice tight with forced confidence. Viktor looked at him the way one looks at a solved equation. Finished. You've been speaking to my wife, Viktor said. The word landed with quiet finality. Marcus laughed short and sharp. Your wife. He glanced at Amara, disbelief flickering into something defensive. You're serious. Viktor took one step forward. Not threatening, not rushed, just closer. You humiliated her, he continued. You enjoyed it. You mistook silence for permission. Marcus scoffed, trying to reclaim ground. Look man, this has nothing to do with you. This is between me and... Viktor raised one hand. The room obeyed it. Between you and consequences, he corrected. And those are very much my concern. Marcus's eyes darted around then, noticing details he'd ignored before. The way security stood still. The way no one met his gaze. The way Amara was no longer the center of attention. He was. You don't get to rewrite what you did, Viktor said. You don't get to minimize it. And you don't get to walk away believing it was harmless. He turned his head slightly, murmuring something to someone Marcus couldn't see. Phone was lifted. A name repeated. Information moved. Marcus's bravado drained by degrees. This is ridiculous, he muttered. You're overreacting. Viktor leaned in just enough for only Marcus to hear. I haven't reacted, he said quietly. I've decided. He straightened, stepping back as if the matter were settled. You will apologize, he continued, voice carrying now. Publicly. You will leave this place. And you will spend the next months discovering how fragile your reputation truly is. Marcus swallowed. You can't. I already have. Amara watched from where she stood, heart steady. Viktor hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't touched Marcus. Yet the balance had shifted completely. Control had replaced chaos. And Marcus Wellington, for the first time in his life, understood what it meant to be powerless. Marcus left the mall alone. Not escorted. Not dragged. Just walking fast enough to pretend it was his choice. The glass doors closed behind him with a soft, indifferent sound, and for the first time that day, there was no audience. The silence followed him anyway. His phone buzzed before he reached his car. One message. Then another. A missed call from his father. A notification from his bank app he didn't open at first, because he already knew. Marcus had always understood power in visible terms. Money in accounts, names that opened doors, invitations that proved relevance. He'd never considered how quickly those things could be rearranged. By nightfall, his name had begun to curdle. The engagement dinner scheduled for the weekend was postponed indefinitely. His firm requested an urgent meeting, phrased politely, the way people speak when they're already backing away. Partner stopped returning calls. A friend sent a message that tried to sound neutral and failed. Marcus poured a drink he didn't taste. Every explanation he rehearsed collapsed under its own weight. There was no version of the story where he was the victim. No performance left to save him. The world had not turned against him loudly. It had simply moved on without him. Across the city, Amara stood at the window of her home, watching lights scatter across the skyline like constellations she no longer needed to navigate by. Viktor stood behind her, close but not touching, as if understanding that this moment belonged to her. It's done, she said quietly. It's begun, Viktor corrected. There's a difference. She nodded. She felt no triumph, no hunger for more, just a strange, unfamiliar peace. Marcus had taken years from her life. Tonight, he had lost his future in a matter of hours. Power, she realized, wasn't about destruction. It was about removing the illusions that kept people safe from themselves. Her phone buzzed once. A final message from an unknown number. No apology. Just anger, poorly disguised as disbelief. She didn't respond. Instead, Amara turned away from the window, from the city, from the past that no longer had access to her. Viktor met her gaze, searching her face. Not for permission but for understanding. I'm okay, she said. And this time it was true. Some worlds end in fire. Others simply close their doors. Marcus Wellington would spend the rest of his life knocking. Amara never would.